All right, good morning, members. It is now 10:02 here at the House Chamber. And we will begin this meeting with the introduction of House Legislature members and the members of the committee. So for introductory purposes, here assisting the committee, we have Mr. Dave Demapon to my right. We have our legislative aide, Ms. Claire Sablon, our legal counsel, Joe Tyrone, our IT, Mr. John Diaz, and our Sergeant at Arms, Mr. Tua. All right, and for the introduction of members, we'll start off to my left. We have Ms. Leila Staffer, Chairwoman for Education. To her left, we have Mr. Vicente Camacho, Chairman for FFA. To his left, we have Mr. Ed Probst, Chairman of Gaming. And to his left, we have Ms. Selena Babauta, Chairwoman for JGO. Now to my right, we have Minority Leader Mr. Ivan Blanco. To his right, Ms. Denita Yanktumai, Chairwoman for Commerce and Tourism. And representing Tinian, we have Representative Mr. Patrick San Nicolas. And then to his right, Chairman for BUTC, Mr. Richard Lizama. Good morning, members. With 9 members present, this constitutes a quorum for today's meeting. Moving on in the agenda, we have public comments. However, we don't see anyone in the gallery. And so we'll move on to the adoption of agenda. Can I get someone to adopt the agenda? Adopted by Ms. Selena Roberto Babauta. Do we get a second? Seconded. The agenda has been adopted and seconded. Discussions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion carries. The agenda is hereby adopted. Moving on to the next item, new business. So members, today we invite the Secretary of Finance to brief the committee on the current financial status of the CNMI, as well as to respond to some of the questions and list of information that we had requested from his office. Please be advised that some of these informations that we had requested was received by the speaker, and it was shared to you guys through email. Part of the request was the first quarter financial report, as well as the list of furloughed employees, which does not come out of his office, but was provided by OPM, and that was shared with you yesterday. So with that said, I now open the floor to the Secretary to provide us his report.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Magnolia and the honorable members of this committee. My name, for the record, is David Atalig. I am the Secretary of Finance, and I'm here to report on the first quarter financial status as pursuant to Public Law 21-35. I am required to report our financial status to this body as well as to the Senate. And I did submit my report in writing, and I'll be summarizing it, as well as prepared to answer questions that was forwarded to me for this committee, and any other questions regarding our finances and any operational items related to my department. But in the first quarter, our actual revenues and revenue estimates, just a background, the projections that we established since last fiscal year is we project based on the historic collections by quarter. So typically in the past, we would budget and allot based on 25% every quarter. However, that change was done last fiscal year to reflect our actual projected amounts for each quarter. In the first quarter, we don't collect as much as the second and third, and then likewise in the fourth. So the percentages is around 23%, then 26%, 28%, and then a lower in the fourth quarter. So therefore, when I report on the revenues and against the projection, it's based on those numbers. In the first quarter, we were able to, we were just about 3% less than forecasted amount. Total revenue collection for quarter one was 26.2 million, and but we had forecasted 27 million for the first quarter, just roughly about 3% less than projection. We do see the second and third quarter is where we will generate most of our revenues for the government. And so at the moment, there is no any fiscal constraints or any additional austerity planned until we get the numbers for second quarter. As far as expenditures are concerned, we are reporting a deficit in the first quarter. We spent approximately, I apologize here, just trying to look here on my actual expenditures. We did spend roughly 24.5% less than actual expenditures. So in my report, I have the details which I submitted to the committee on terms of expenditure. One of the main sources of our over expenditure is about $8 million in COVID expenditures for the quarantine facilities and personnel in our departments of DFEMS, DPS, as well as customs for the border control, as well as quarantine facility management. As far as the transfers in and out, we do have figures on how much we've transferred out for debt, how much we've spent for the settlement fund, as well as other autonomous agencies that are appropriated by this body. As far as the review and looking forward into this using first quarter figures, if it wasn't for a lot of federal assistance that we've received, we would be really impacted financially. Keep in mind our annual fiscal year budget of $133 million was the same level as the adjusted budget from last fiscal year due to the pandemic. We do see the numbers not really meeting that level. We're hopeful that a lot of the federal aid coming in and programs, as well as a lot of projects that are coming into play this fiscal year due to the awards of Typhoon U2 recovery with hazard mitigations and the PA project. So it took a couple years to get a lot of these infrastructure projects and U2 recovery programs into play, which will contribute to our economy and the projections for taxes and for our operations as a government. We are looking and tracking very closely all the funds generated or received by the federal government in terms of the CARES Act, the new recently passed relief bill on December 27th, as well as the upcoming American Rescue Plan, which will tremendously help our Commonwealth and our people. Mr. Chairman, I have this all in your possession. Hopefully, the committee members. I did receive questions from the committee, and I am prepared to answer these questions in any format you'd like. I can either go down the list, or we can ask the questions by the members. I am open for questions now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Secretary Atalig. I believe all the invitation was open to the members to contribute to this list of questions. So maybe if you go down the list and then they'll formulate their questions, and at the end they'll come up with their questions in addition to what you've presented.
Thank you. Um, the first question that was sent to me was discussing about our detailed revenue collection for months ending, I would assume the months ending August 31st, September 30th, October 31st, November 30th, and December 31st. As the committee should have in possession is my year-end report, which detailed the last fiscal year's year-end numbers and figures, which was sent to the legislature, as well as the first quarter report. Any questions from the committee in terms of any specific details, I can try to answer. I did just provide the data. As far as the second question, Mr. Chairman, um, it was pretty much the same question, but asking for the expenditure report. And likewise, the expenditure report, detailed expenditure report, was submitted to this legislature for year-end, fiscal year 2020, as well as the first quarter of FY 2021.
All right, Mr. Secretary, so going back to the first quarter of fiscal year 2021, um, there's you stated there was an overexpenditure by approximately 8 million, which relates to COVID. What's the status of the CARES Act funding that the CNMI received to reimburse these expenses?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. If you recall, the CARES Act funds was received by the central government of $36.7 million total for mitigation and our response to COVID-19. Those funds has been expended. The total cost for our excuse me, for COVID response to date, we have a running balance of about $88 million. I think I have the details here. We have expended about $82.3 million. We've received from the CARES or from FEMA for reimbursements of about $10.1 million. We are expecting about $3 or $4 million this week due to the 25% waiver that President Biden signed across the board for requests for a waiver of the matching. And so back to your question in terms of the first quarter, these are running expenditures that the central government pays for, and we request for reimbursements. That process is quite slow. I am aware that we are awarded about $25 million, but of that $25 million, we've only drawn down about $10.1 million. We have about $50 million awaiting to be awarded for expenditures and different public project worksheets that is with FEMA to be awarded. Once these are awarded, then we can start the process of requesting for the reimbursements. So we're looking at about a total of about $70 million to be awarded by FEMA for COVID response. At the moment, we've only received about $10.1 million with several million dollars being drawn down this week, and the PA office are now pretty fully staffed that they are now producing and processing requests of reimbursements for the central government for the COVID response. I hope I answered your question, Chairman.
Yes, thank you. Members, you have any questions pertaining to the first two questions that we provided the Secretary? Mr. Lozama?
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you for coming, Mr. Secretary. That's $70 million awarded by FEMA that you just mentioned. Would I be able to pay some of those vendors that has been paid if those money comes in? Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Lozama. Yes, exactly. We are awaiting for the awards from FEMA. The expenditures and the reports for the different project worksheets related to COVID has been submitted to FEMA, and so far to date we've been awarded about 25 million, with about another 45 to 50 million waiting to be awarded. And so yes, once these are received, we will be paying these vendors that we have helping us in this pandemic. Thank you.
All right, any other members? If none, Mr. Secretary, you can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item is regarding debt service. I am reporting to this body that we've, in quarter one, our total bond debt, bond payments for bonds 2007A and B is a total of about $7 million annually in debt service payments. Part of our debt is also the settlement fund, which we're obligated to pay $40 million this year. In the first quarter, we've paid our bonds about $700,000. We expect in a couple, actually in next month, we have another payment of about $2.9 million for debt for our bonds in the past. And then in terms of other debts that we have relating to a Bank of Guam loan that we received for our pension obligation bond, it was a bond, a pre-bond amount received from the Bank of Guam. That amount we've paid back about $300,000 in that. Keep in mind that bond money from the Bank of Guam, the bulk, or I would say all that money went straight for settlement fund debts, whether it was the 75% payment as well as our APGA. We had a $17.3 million APGA payment due to the settlement fund for FY 2017 and 2018, and I was able to pay that to the settlement fund to get us up to date with the settlement fund. As far as our MPLT debts, those are in and out. All earned interest and due to the CNMI is being offset with our debt, so there's no actual cash payment to MPLT. So as we get quarterly reports from MPLT, they show us how much has been credited towards that debt. And so to date, they've already credited over about $3 million of the $15 million in MPLT debt. The next question was talking about also about the NMI settlement fund and how much we've been paid. To date, in the first quarter, we paid $6 million. We are forecasted for the second quarter is $14 million. In quarter three, we owe $8 million, and the fourth quarter we will owe $12 million for a total of $40 million to the settlement fund. At this time, Chairman, I can take some questions or I can continue on. I want to kind of keep it within the same topics of different financial expenditure items.
Sure. Members, you have any questions in regards to the settlement fund? If there are none, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item on the list from the committee is about the 25% due to retirees that our administration is committed and continually committed to ensuring our retirees get paid their full pension, which is the $40 million, which is due to the settlement fund. That represents 75% of their pension, or payment for 75% of their pension. The other 25% is about an average of about $1.2 million a month, or about close to $13 million annually. At the moment, due to the Casino BGR, which is supposed to fund this program, has not been funding it, obviously, for obvious reasons. The administration has been utilizing general fund to ensure those payments are made. And with that direction, I've been able to continually pay the 25% to the retirees. In first quarter, I've remitted $3.4 million to the retirement fund, and that's about the average payment to the retirement fund on a quarterly basis for the 25% of our retirees' payment. Any questions in regards to the 25%?
Yeah, sorry, before we proceed, I'd like to recognize the chairwoman for Health and Welfare, Representative Christina Sablan, and it looks like she has a question, so you may ask your question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Secretary Atalig. Did you say what the funding source is, though, for the 25%, if not the casino BGR? I'm not sure if I caught that.
I mentioned that we are not receiving any revenues from the casino BGR, and therefore I am utilizing general fund to pay that. And so on a quarterly basis, I would need to, and I know that's a question down in the line, is how much has been reprogrammed. And so at the moment, we've been just paying for the 25%. I do have a settlement agreement with the casino, and as I receive monies, those will be reimbursing the general fund. As you brought up, Congresswoman, we received last month $1 million as a payment towards the casino BGR taxes due, which we received, and we recorded it as part of the BGR of the casino. However, transferred that to reimburse the general fund for funds used from the general fund to pay for the retirees' 25%.
So that will be then part of the reprogramming activities report, is what sources were being tapped. I guess different business units from the general fund, right?
That's correct.
Are being tapped for this. And so that would include also like local funds then?
That's correct.
Okay. I mean like for local appropriations, local projects.
General fund.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Sablan. Mr. Lizama?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you again, Mr. Secretary. As a retiree, of course, I'm not receiving my retirement now, but I'm concerned. 25% recovery, not getting anything from the IPI or so forth. How do we recover that? It seems like we're going down and down and down, and we owe the retiree. So is the retirement going to be broke? In your opinion, can you tell me that?
In my opinion, and in recommendations, obviously we have a bill that was passed in the last legislature and was sitting with the Senate to correct the allocation or the funding source for the retirement funds payment. In the meantime, we are using general fund, reprogramming and making sacrifices for our retirees. That I can assure you. My outlook is if the casino will not be generating any revenues in the next fiscal year budget, we need to identify other sources of funds to make up for that, because it is difficult to continue to pay for the full retirement pension without a full appropriation for that line item. But I assure you, for the retirees, that this administration is committed 100% to ensuring that retirees get their full pension, and we've have for the last many years. And to answer your question, it is a high priority, and we'll ensure that that gets paid.
Thank you, Rep. Lizama. Any other members? If none, Mr. Secretary, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next question on the list is regarding U2 expenses to date. How much was reimbursed and how much is pending reimbursement, as well as probably the other question is how much is deemed non-reimbursable. To date, U2 running balance is about $32.5 million. To date, we've received $29.7 million in reimbursements for U2. Let's make sure we mentally keep in mind separating U2 from COVID. They're two different disasters and recorded and accounted for separately. And In the first quarter, we did receive $5.4 million of reimbursements for U2 expenses. Again, we are still continuing to press on reimbursements for U2. We do have many requests for reimbursements at U2 to this date. We continually receive, if not non-award, and we submit, the Public Assistance Office resubmits a request to reconsider for these classified as non-reimbursable. I do not have the details of the total number of what is deemed non-reimbursable. I am aware of one line item that's very clear, and that's the payroll of U2 overtimes and response cost, strictly on payroll. We incurred a total of about over $16 million for U2 overtime payments, and we've only received $8 million as a reimbursement. So in my book, it's about 50%. Half of that is deemed unreimbursable, and which the central government is liable to has paid. It's just we won't receive those funds. Other items and different public, other project worksheets, there's like tens and 20s of different kinds of public project worksheets. The appropriate office would be the Public Assistance Office to have the details of that. But looking at it holistically and as a general sense to give the members a sense of an estimate to get an idea of these expenditures and what we've received, that's the numbers I have based on our system and what's recorded in our system to date. And so in terms of, again, we're still looking, there's still a lot of reimbursements still due CNMI from Typhoon U2. As well as in Typhoon U2 response, we do have a lot of awards that are still pending to be completed, a lot of projects, hazard mitigation projects. We're looking at over $100 million of projects still waiting to be get off the ground. We have a lot of projects still with CUC, power, still many power poles still recorded and waiting for award. I believe it's more than 1,000 more concrete poles that are still pending through hazard mitigation program. We have some underground power projects from the power plant to CHCC, and I think they're still working on getting underground power project to the airport. Those are part of the hazard mitigation programs that projects are funded for. It's getting this, getting the projects going. A lot of them has a lot of permitting issues, or not issues, but requirements that take time, environmental assessments and reports, as well as we have a challenge, obviously, with labor to cut and contract out these projects. So the administration is working on different avenues to get and find ways to bring in construction laborers, and unfortunately with the pandemic it didn't really help in our progress, but it is not being forgotten. There's a lot of projects and more projects that can help our economy and also harden our CNMI. And so that's in terms of the U2. I can answer questions regarding to U2 expenditures to this committee at this time. Thank you.
The chair recognizes Rep. Staffler.
Thank you, Mr. Atalig, for joining us today. If you could just clarify, if I think I misheard, there was 32 million spent on U2?
No, yeah, the running balance that is
Running
still
balance.
pending in my system is $32.5 million. It's still pending reimbursement.
Okay.
We've spent over hundreds of millions for the total U2. If we include all expenditures, including component units, the cost of, it's all recorded as one huge disaster account. And so to pull out how much we've spent for, in terms of CPA, CUC, PSS, and other agencies, NMC, as well as the central government and all the departments and the mayors for both both Saipan and Tinian.
And so, like, for example, PSS projects, those must be prepaid and then reimbursed still?
Under those PA programs, some of these projects, there's the different categories of FEMA programs. So there's the immediate like response, right after the typhoon. Those are like we pay now, the reimbursement. Then there's the continuing that recovery period, and those are also you pay and get reimbursed. Then there's the other hazard mitigation or future prevention and projects to rebuild and harden our infrastructure, and those like PSS are receiving awards. They do not have to spend it up front. They are awarded, for example, for Hopwood about, let's say, $25 million, and $25 million, but we will be reimbursed, or we can draw down, PSS can draw down 90%. There's a 10% matching. So PSS will have to come up with a 10% or $2.5 million. As the project continues and goes and they get an invoice, then they can draw down the money to pay for that project from FEMA. It's not pay now and get reimbursed.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, thank you.
So that 16 million of payroll, the 16 million you mentioned is part of the total disaster spending. Okay, thank you. I was just clarifying in my mind.
16 million spending for payroll.
Payroll, yeah, that's the
Yes.
number alone. I was thinking that the 32 and the 16 were not adding up, but I understand now. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Staffler. Any other member? I recognize Rep. Nazama.
Thank you again, Mr. Atalig. Because of the underground electrical lines, it's called hazardous mitigation that you mentioned about the CUC. They can be done, unlike the way just explained to her about emergency project. Get them done and get reimbursement later, or have to be. Are the monies already here?
I believe the hazard mitigation has a list of projects and priorities that FEMA has awarded or agreed to the project. And your question is, can we spend that money now and then get reimbursed? I would say probably. We just don't have the funds to pay it up front now and get reimbursed. So hence the waiting for that project to start and be billed and invoiced, and then request for the drawdowns. The drawdowns from FEMA, once awarded and proper documentation to draw down, is not a challenge. If the money is awarded, we can draw it down. We just have to justify it. The challenge is getting it awarded takes a long time. And so, like I mentioned, and I'll discuss in our next item, for COVID-related expenses, there's close to $50 million of projects or different parts of the COVID response, and is getting it awarded. And so it takes time for that FEMA process. Anything, and again, like I said, I'll put a disclaimer. I'm not an expert on the FEMA reimbursement side, and that's the Public Assistance Office, which you're more than welcome to probably call and get information. But generally speaking, the FEMA process goes through a chain of so many approvals. And if the value is more than $1 million, it goes through another layer of approvals through the congressional office in the mainland or in the federal government. And so Um, Lately, what we've been doing with our COVID reimbursements or requests, we we try to look and see what reimbursements that are deemed ready to be requested for drawdown, and if it's less than $1 million, we do it quickly. We don't wait till the whole project is done and then ask for it. It takes forever, as we experience. And so, to back to answer your question, Congressman Lizama, yes, the CNMI government uh, can. We know the projects are approved. We can pay for it and then ask for reimbursement later. That certainly we can do that. The issue and the problem is we don't have the funds to um, to start the project on our own to be reimbursed later. Thank you.
Just to add up, sir, if you mind. Because the typhoon seasons are coming, and being a PUTC chairman, I'm very concerned, and thank you for your response. I yield back.
Thank you, Rep. Lizama. I now recognize Rep. Babalta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Secretary Atalig. How are you today?
Good, thank you.
My question for you this morning is, what is the time frame for the obligation and expenditure of these FEMA funds? Is there a timeline? Can you
Good
elaborate
question.
on that?
Um, Typically, the timeline, generally speaking, is like a 2-year period. Once you get to from the disaster date, I'll give you an example. My request for, which we'll be probably speaking a little bit more about, the Community Disaster Loan Program out of FEMA. The disaster happened, obviously, we all know, in 2018, late 2018. 2 years later is usually the period that you have a window of 2 years to get all requests for projects or requests for um, reimbursements or submission of requests for reimbursement within a 2-year period. We can ask for extensions, and we've done that in the past, I believe, for Mankut and Sudalor. So those can be requested for extension on certain projects. But generally speaking, to answer your question, is about 2-year period after the disaster.
Thank you. My next question is, how frequently do you have to report to the federal government the expenditure of these funds that have come down from FEMA in particular?
The Public Assistance Office submits these reports to FEMA directly, but they do get the information from my office as well. And so quarterly basis is the standard time frame for all these reporting requirements.
One more question, please. Is the CNMI government entitled to collect indirect fees from FEMA funds? And if so, how much has been collected to date, and how have those funds been used?
Good question. Many of the FEMA funds do not qualify for indirect funds, and let me explain. Because indirectly, we also have a matching, which is somewhat of the self-support of these projects or these funds. However, under the Public Assistance Office, it is not called indirect, but it's called management fees, which are funds allocated to support the office in working and putting together all these documentations and requests and hiring of staff and professional staffs, meaning whether it's architects, engineers, and so forth. Those funds are, I don't have the exact numbers of that. I can get that back to you, and how much we've expended, but they are the ones that, in terms of the FEMA side of things, getting indirect, somewhat of what we all know as indirect costs.
I'll yield for now, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Babalta. Sorry, just to add on to her question. So, on your first quarter report, it showed that you've collected about a little over $500,000 in indirect cost reimbursement. That's for other projects, or?
In the CNMI government, we collect indirect costs for all federal grants in the central government. And so this is a drawdown and recorded as how much we collected for indirect costs. Our current cooperative agreement for indirect costs is 9.7% of their total grant award. And so it's based on, we can only collect or draw down indirect costs based on actual expenditures from these granting agencies. And so if Office of Grants Management gets a grant for $100,000, 10% of that will, or 9.7% is if they spent the 100,000, then we can collect the $9,700 for indirect costs, as indirect costs.
Thank you. I now recognize Rep. Staffler.
Thank you. I wondered, just going back to the unreimbursable amounts, what kind of internal controls do we have to avoid that kind of thing?
Great question. And so I found, obviously, I came in after you two and was informed of a lot of these unreimbursable items that was expended. So for disasters that's passed, we had a couple disasters, Hagibis and Bululu, that went through our islands and make sure that we watch our expenditures. That led into what we're doing with the disaster of COVID, deemed COVID as a disaster. What we have in place is we have a routing that now includes myself and making sure also the AG is on every document that we need reimbursements with. It does not matter the amount, it matters what we're going to request for reimbursement. Must have myself and the Attorney General's signature on a contract in order to get reimbursed. Now, for things that were deemed unreimbursable, which I know is unreimbursable by FEMA, that's why we had the CARES Act that helped funded those that we know it's not going to get reimbursed by FEMA. I'll give an example. We utilized a huge parking area of CHCC for the MCAT, the medical tents that we have out there in anticipation of a big COVID positive numbers. Fortunately, we didn't have to use it as a medical facility, but we took up a lot of parking spaces. And so when CHCC asked that they build a temporary parking or a parking across the street in their property, FEMA will not pay for that. It's not COVID related, but we used CARES Act funds to, and some funds from OIA that was specifically written to cover those expenses. Those were not done by FEMA. And just so you can be aware or understand that program. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank
Thank
you. I yield.
Thank you, Rep. Staffler. Any other members? I now recognize Rep. Yanktamai.
Good morning, Secretary.
Morning.
You said there's still many awards to be awarded? Is it? Yeah, from you two.
For you two,
Yeah.
there are still projects or asking for funding to pay for some expenditures through you two. That's correct.
Okay. So, are businesses, can businesses get this also? This award from you two?
No, these are usually already services provided and done with and related to you two. No new opportunities for business to get involved is the U2 Hazard Mitigation Program, or funds that hazard mitigation received due to the disaster of U2. These are projects that are in the books ready to be awarded or to be seeked out. There's a lot of opportunities there. I do not have that list, but mainly infrastructure projects. And so hazard mitigation would be the office to get more details on.
Thank you.
Any other members? I now recognize Rep. Sablan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned the CARES Act money. Could you provide this committee with the expenditure report? And is there a balance of CARES Act money still?
There may be a small amount available probably, and there's probably some expenditures or encumbrances that probably could be liquidated. But generally speaking, the first CARES Act funds, the $36 million we received, has been expended.
36 million.
Mhm.
Okay. And when you say there's a small balance left, like less than
Less than
a million?
$10,000.
Oh, okay, that's small. Okay. Um, okay. Yeah, I'd be really interested in seeing how those funds were distributed. And there was, as I recall, like a spending plan that just kind of spelled out in very broad strokes how those funds would be allocated. For the most part, has the administration followed that plan, or were there some major adjustments?
Pretty much, other than we adjusted it to help out Rhoda and Tinian and the judicial as well as the legislature with its funding needs related to CARES COVID response. So we were able to allocate, and because a lot of items we weren't sure. The pandemic was a different, it's not like a natural disaster that FEMA's used to working on. A lot of things that dealt with the pandemic and COVID and expenditures were pretty new in terms of what is allowable and not allowable. So at times when we didn't know what the answer was, we used the CARES Act money
Okay.
to respond to whatever COVID and CHCC recommended we do. I would have to share that a lot of the expenditures for COVID is driven by CHCC and CEO Munya and her team, and mainly guided by CDC guidelines. And so when they share with us their plans and how we can get through this, and fortunately we just kind of listened and went with it, and hence I think the success in terms of our numbers and our safety. It did cost us quite a penny though.
Okay. And I know that the pandemic expenses are the next item on the question list, but we have been getting some complaints, I guess, from vendors that are still awaiting payment by the COVID-19 task force for work performed or supplies provided. And if CARES Act money is not available to pay them, are we relying primarily on the general fund and then looking for reimbursements later? Is that where the delays are now?
We are at that stage where the funds that I had with CARES Act helped us get through while we're waiting for the reimbursements or the award and then reimbursements. We reached that level of, okay, I can't continue to expend general fund for COVID operations without reimbursements. And so I've been pushing for reimbursements because I cannot also ignore the fact that we have a government to operate non-COVID related. And that is just as important to keep this government running. And so therefore, I've been working with the administration as well as with the PA office. We've been minimizing and reducing our costs for COVID. And so we've tried to, in terms of the quarantine operations and whatnot, we've been able to maintain and minimize expense. It's now that next phase of vaccine administration and vaccine management, which has started to also boost up some expenditures, but we are aware that FEMA has shared with us that all vaccination management and expenditures are 100%, prior to the waiver, 100% reimbursable. So CHCC has been focused on that in that operation of the vaccine and getting everyone vaccinated, and the operational costs for all three islands, Rhoda, Saipan, and Tinian. And so we are at that point where, like like I said, I'm waiting on reimbursements to make sure I pay some of these vendors. And as I mentioned earlier, we do have about over $3.5 million that was just drawn down last night. And then we have several under $1 million requests projected to be submitted to my office for reimbursements this week. And so they're getting their reimbursements requests in, and some awards are being awarded, and so it's helpful, and it relieves a little stress that I have on trying to ensure and balance our funds, our cash.
And thank you, and I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Sablan. Any other members regarding U2 expenses? Rep. Babalta?
I wanted to ask more about the FEMA funds.
Sure. Go
Thank
ahead.
you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, there was recent report in the media about $644 million being given to the CNMI to date from FEMA, from all the disasters, I would imagine. Who is the expenditure authority of these funds?
That's probably a grand total of all kinds of, and it depends if it's a project that's related to some of the component units, autonomous agencies, then it's their leadership. If it, the bulk of that will be the CNMI, and mainly with the expenditure would be the GAR, is the governor's authorized rep for that disaster would have expenditure authority as well as the governor.
That would be Mr. Patrick Guerrero, is that correct?
For you two, it's Miss Virginia Vicky Villagomez.
Okay, thank you. Hold on. You mentioned earlier that you were transferring funds to accommodate expenditures from your office, mainly, and I didn't catch what it was alluding to, but do you have unlimited reprogramming authority at this time? Unlimited reprogramming?
No, I do not. The governor does. Based on Public Law 21-35, he has 100% reprogramming authority.
So he would be the person to advise you or tell you you need to move funds to accommodate expenditures for, like, personnel, let's say DPS, with if they're running on a deficit, you know, by the quarter or by payroll. Is that correct?
Not directly. He has the authority. It is my office and the budget office that will share with him those figures and our recommendation to reprogram to ensure that we're within budget. Governor is not in the trenches in the finances to make recommendation which account to transfer to and from, but he has the authority and the signature authority for us to do that. I hope that makes sense.
One more question, please, Mr. Chairman. Of the FEMA funds that have come in, I would be very interested to see a report, including the business units that these funds have gone out to. Oh, you mentioned that it was one, right? One disaster. Okay, I'm sorry about that.
It is one disaster, but we have multiple sub-accounts that can give you the detail you're asking. I think what you're asking for.
That's what I was asking for.
That's no problem. We can
Okay.
provide that.
Thank you. One more. Why is it that the legislature, after repeated requests to have access to the J.D. Edwards system, have they not been granted? I've spoken and met with many departments, and these are line agencies, DFEMS, DOC, Judiciary, you name it, they have access to J.D. Edwards, the system that finance runs off. Why is it that the legislature has not been granted access to the J.D. Edwards system? The judiciary certainly has access.
It all depends on the requests for access. A lot of agencies and departments have view-only access on only their business unit. Certainly the legislature can have that view access. But when you're asking for access for the full range of the whole system, let me just be frank. Our system is inaccurate. For me to, let me share this. It's a very outdated system. A lot of entries in there in past has not been done that needed to be done. So my staff has to download this data and verify the data and look at different multiple ways of the different reports that is being requested for, and basically reproduce a report that is accurate or that I can feel confident to certify on. That has been my first priority since coming on as Secretary of Finance. I've shared with this body, I've shared with as I was going through the confirmation process, my review of the system. It is so outdated. It is still using DOS versions. But the good news is I have a new system coming and something to look forward to, which we started implementation just last month. But to give information to the legislature to do what I feel you should be or wanting to get, honestly speaking, we're not going to speak the right, and we're just going to make things worse for both of us. And so I've been trying diligently to meet with fiscal analysts or your analyst and meet regularly and communicate. And I'm very open with the data. Just I apologize, it takes time. We hope and we know the new system can provide dashboards and up-to-the-minute reports for depending on who is being given access to. And to answer your question, it's not to hide information, it's to minimize any misconception, or even our staff, my staff, sometimes get confused and not knowing, and we've had turnover from administration to administration. There's a lot of entries that are done manually and not just system-based. So I hope
Thank
that
you.
answered your question.
Thank you. It does. It was certainly not to imply that you were going to hide anything. It was just, I was just concerned that other agencies had access, and the House of Representatives or the legislature in general, who actually work on the budget and have to pass a budget, do not have access to these numbers, even if it's only for viewing. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
And even budget office. Our budget office has their own software. They're not relying on JD. So that tells you the system about JD. And so just to add to I understand where you're coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep.
Are you?
Evalsa. Thank you. At this time, before we move on to the next question, real quick, I give the floor over to our fiscal analyst.
Mr. Chairman, good morning and thank you. With respect to the inquiry about the J.D. Edwards system, Mr. Secretary, basically what we actually needed when we attempt to obtain information from the Department of Finance is basically the important fund balances of certain business units relative to their activities. In the case, for example, for solid waste revolving fund, certain delegation members would like to know, on a day-to-day basis, what's the balance with that in particular. And in some cases also, other revolving funds that they might be interested to know ahead of time before they decide and make decision during the session as to how much money will be allocated or appropriated for, CAP projects, for social and community projects, things like that nature. So basically, we're only trying to view certain information so that we can present that information to the decision makers here at the legislature, which are the members here. I believe, Mr. Secretary, if you could perhaps restrict any confidentiality of any financial information so that we can be able to get this information to the members so that they can make better decisions. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Chairman, may I respond just briefly? I
Sure,
totally
sure.
understand where that, the inquiry and things, but even that, getting fund balances on a daily or up-to-date information, I don't even know that directly by just going into JD. That's sad, that's unfortunate, but I am doing something about it. And to give you that is going to just confuse both of us. We're going to contradict each other, and it's better that I make sure we review it and give you the proper numbers. So when the delegations appropriate, it's appropriate, a correct amount, and not something that's either overstated or understated. That's my whole point. It's nothing to reduce. We can give you view access. That's not an issue. But if you make decisions on that, I personally am not as confident. For transactions and daily transactions of POs and some expenditures, no problem. Revenues, things that different business units that are created by new laws, and then we move here and there. Sometimes those movements are not happening quickly enough to represent in the system, and therefore I think unfortunately there is a delay in getting reports out for the members' knowledge. Um, Mr. Demapan has sent me requests for information for the delegations over 2 weeks ago, and I apologize. We're working on it. We're getting it. We just want to make sure it's accurate enough, knowing that the delegations will be appropriating funds that I need to ensure that I have funds for. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Secretary. With that, please proceed to the next item.
Next on the item is about the pandemic expenses in U2. And similar to U2, same processes, so questions regards FEMA is pretty much the same answer. And to date, as I shared earlier, we have a current running balance of $82.3 million. Of that, we have been reimbursed 10.1 million, and just in the first quarter of that 10 million, I guess this will share with you the delay on how to get these reimbursements. Just in the first quarter, out of the 10.1, in the first quarter we received 8.1. So can you imagine, from March through September 30th, I didn't get zero reimbursements. And so those are challenges that we have as a Commonwealth, or in my position, to balance funds that we have to respond to the pandemic, but at the same time actual having cash to pay vendors and getting the equipment or the necessary things, PPEs, that we needed. We're very fortunate that we had 36 million from the CARES Act that assisted the state or our territory. And so what is deemed non-reimbursable? I don't have that figure here now. There is a figure. I don't have a direct figure, but there are some figures that were deemed unreimbursable, so we covered it through CARES Act. And so I will have a report on our CARES Act funds, how we expended it as requested by Chairwoman here, and then have that for you. I just don't have that detail in front of me. But I can answer any questions regarding to our expenditures with the COVID pandemic.
Okay, so just for clarification, of the 82.3, 10.1 was reimbursed?
We were reimbursed 10.1, yes.
All right, now members, any questions in regards to the pandemic? I now recognize Rep. Sablan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what accounts for the delay in getting these reimbursements for COVID-19 expenses?
I wish I had the magical answer. A lot of the delay or the time it takes FEMA to respond to those requests for reimbursement. We were aware that FEMA was short-staffed. We had staff during the pandemic that were working from their homes or were just completely not working due to government shutdowns or reduce hours just because of the pandemic. Um, I think as we got through that major period of that bell curve of the high positive cases in the mainland, I think as we got into towards the new fiscal year, there has been more activity from FEMA and their response to our request. So I believe the elections delayed things. There's a lot of just, I would say, non-factual answers, but it's just overall a lot of things were happening in the federal government side that caused a lot longer delay than we've experienced when we were dealing with for you two.
Okay. And following up on Chairwoman Babata's earlier question regarding your reprogramming power. So the governor has the unlimited reprogramming authority currently by law. And then he has been issuing executive orders that give you authority to access, transfer funds, reprogram from any government account, correct?
That's correct,
And-
for COVID.
Oh, right, for COVID. And so the executive orders have also directed you to create a COVID-19 threat prevention and mitigation account, and all the funds that were taken under this authority are supposed to be deposited into the account. So that account has been created?
Yes, ma'am.
And is that the report that you'll also be providing, that you could
Yes.
also provide to this
Yes,
committee?
ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Rep. Sablan. Any other members? Okay, if none, we'll move on.
Okay. Next is the, as mentioned, the FEMA Community Disaster Loan. It was authorized in the new consolidated budget for the federal government. The CDL program is out of FEMA, and we received $5 million. In early October is when we actually received the funds. So we received $5 million. However, we, after analyzing and working with the CDL team out of FEMA and my staff and the budget office staff, we came up with a figure of about $93 million that FEMA said that we were qualified or qualified to take out a CDL loan in the amount of $93 million. However, FEMA is, by statute, the maximum they can give out without congressional assistance is $5 million. We've reached out to our great congressman to include language to give us the authority, the authorization, or to give FEMA authorization to give us the balance. That was done and submitted and passed in the Consolidated Budget Act on December 27th of 2020, and therefore we are working right now with the CDO office to try to get this additional $88 million to us. They met with the CDL office, or FEMA, met with the OMB office. My understanding is they met last week, and they're working on the actual OMB guidelines and how to address the language in the Budget Act, or in the Consolidated Budget Act. And so we're just awaiting to hear back from them this week. Included in this Budget Act was the forgiveness already of the $5 million we received. Kilili did a great job again of including language to relieve us of that $5 million loan that we received. And so we also asked the CDL team to look at that and I guess close the books on that based on the Consolidated Budget Act. So that is the latest report on the CDL. I can answer any questions directly related to CDL and the funds, Mr. Chairman. So I'll open it up for questions if there's any questions on that.
Yes, but maybe before we accept questions, since we have new members, can you please explain where this, what's the plan for this 88 million?
Okay, so I had a spending plan already produced for the whole $93 million. Majority of that was to pay 100% everything we owed to vendors for Typhoon U2 expenses, or what we had at that time. We had about $20 million still owed to vendors, heavy equipment operators, and different invoices still coming in at that time. In addition to that 88 million or that $20 million, of the $88 million, we had allocated assistance to all three islands. We had monies to pay back our debt with MPLT because we borrowed money due to U2 assistance to help with U2 expenses. And so there was a list of, I can provide that original spending plan, and my staff has been working and giving me an update on a new spending plan for this $88 million. If that's okay, Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for that. Members, do you have any questions in regards to the CDL? All right, if none, Mr. Secretary, please continue.
Yeah, the next question obviously is the initial $5 million. We received that October 3rd of 2020. And to be quite frank, I utilized the $5 million and transferred to the general fund, and allowed my treasurer to pay any expenditures needed regards to any U2 expenses that we had. Keep in mind, there's a lot of U2 expenses that the general fund has paid and has been awaiting reimbursements for U2. So as we're tracking how much can my treasurer transfer from the U2 expenses and make sure that if we're able to use it for general fund purposes. And so there are some expenditures. I can get details on, how we spent the $5 million, but generally speaking, $5 million came in. We deposited into the general fund and used as how we manage our cash management. But it was $5 million cash, so that was helpful to us in our, I would say, lack of an economy and lack of revenues or minimal revenues coming into our coffers.
I now recognize Rep. Sablan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're using, if I'm understanding this correctly, we're using the funds that we're able to get through the CDL program to cover U2 expenses that we are also still awaiting reimbursement for?
That's correct. Now, keep in mind the CDL is that CDL program is strictly used to help recover any operational losses or operational expenses you had due to the cause of the disaster.
Okay.
So it's pretty general how I can use it. However, I've been directing that we need to make sure we account for all our U2 expenses. But to answer your question, there's other expenses that, for example, the $8 million non-deemed reimbursable that we've paid already, and how can I help absorb that cost or for the need of today? Having that $5 million was very helpful to help pay for our normal operations.
Okay, so a significant portion of the 88 million then you would expect would be used to cover government operations.
That's correct.
Okay, could it be used for the settlement fund payments or?
It can.
Yeah, okay. And you said that there is a new spending plan that you and your staff are working on.
Yes.
For the 88 million.
Yes, that's correct. I wanted to update at the time what the running balance was due to for U2 expenses. Those numbers have gone down.
Okay.
And so we'll reduce that. And then I just wanted to make sure and we update how much is based on the spending plan, how much at the time, let's say it was, at the time I only had drew down 10 million from MPLT, but now I had to tap into the additional 5 million. And at that time, as we all know, that loan was due to my needs to cover U2 expenses.
Right.
And
But
so
you could also use it to cover payroll.
that's right.
Could you use it as, say, like a match for lost wages assistance?
We can,
You could. Okay.
as long as it becomes state dollars, and so it is definitely an allowable expense.
Okay. Yeah, I would love to see that updated spending plan, Mr. Secretary, when that's available.
Yeah, I hope to have that by at least midweek next week.
Okay. And did OMB give you any guidance? Sorry, the CDL office, did they give you any guidance about the timeline for when you could expect the CNMI to receive the remaining 88 million?
To receive, when we communicated with them in mid-January, we were hoping by end of February. Here we are in the last week,
Yeah.
and they finally were able to meet with OMB to get the guidelines. They did share with us that this was the first time that type of language was written in regards to additional funds because it was part of their budget. Other disaster approvals for CDL were separate appropriations. There was disaster appropriations that included CDL authority or appropriations. And so the FEMA staff were kind of not confused, but they just needed guidance and clarification on how to, is it additional monies they receive that they can give us, or do they still use their other funds that they have for on previous disasters that they are allowed to spend for other disasters? So a lot of questions from the federal side is my gather.
Okay.
I hope as soon as they get the guidance that they can remit that money right away.
Okay. And to be clear, this is federal OMB guidance that you're
Correct.
getting? Okay.
Yes, federal OMB.
Okay. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Rep. Saban. Before I move on to the next member, so what is the debt service on the CDL, and would it be forgiven later on down the line?
So as I shared earlier, the first $5 million has been forgiven based on the Consolidated Appropriation Act. And for the future, it is a 5-year loan. You do not pay anything until the 5th year, and it's basically about a 1 or 1.5% interest. However, there is also a clause that allows them to convert the loan into a grant should you show 3 years of consecutive deficits, operational deficits due to the disaster. And as we all know, as I've reported, we're deficit on 2018, 2019, and I'll be showing a deficit on FY 2020. And so it's good timing. I can't say much for FY 2021. I do not see us, if all these federal funds come, I do not see us being in a deficit for FY 2021, which then will kick in this 3 years of CDL could be converted to a grant. We expect it to be converted to a grant, if that answers your question, Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Secretary. I now give the floor to Rep. Babalta.
Thank you. You keep mentioning the $16 million overspent on personnel for U2. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the total expenditure spent for payroll for U2
Payroll,
disaster.
yes.
That's correct.
And you said 8 million of that is reimbursable.
We received $8 million in reimbursements.
Have all the overtime been paid to those who were eligible for it?
Yes, I have paid everyone their overtime. Just to give you a background on the reason why I did, we were being visited and communicating with the U.S. Department of Labor for violation of not paying overtime. And so we worked with the U.S. Department of Labor, the local office. I worked with them. We met, we analyzed the figures. We gave them, in correlation with the PA office, worked and came out with a amount that we needed to pay our workers for their work in U2. We were able to avoid being sanctioned, and we paid everyone their due monies that is owed 1.5%. So we paid 1.5 overtime for all employees that were still pending. There is still a question if I still need to owe the additional one because the directive the governor had saying paying 2.5. And so right now I've been arguing that I don't owe that because one, we're not going to get reimbursed, and two, the decision on that, the governor's decision at that time was based on information that we will be reimbursed the full 2.5, and which we know as a fact we didn't. Therefore, I'm not going to pay additional 1% to all those that did not. Now, those that did receive all their 2.5, it's done with. It's in the past. I'm not going to go back and get it.
One more question. So of the 16 million, 8 million was reimbursed, and there's 8 million that will not be reimbursed by FEMA. And you mentioned it's done, it's in the past, that the CNMI government has absorbed it. Are there any plans? I will assume that the other 8 million was the overtime paid to department secretaries who, according to the Attorney General, were not entitled to overtime pay. Are there any plans to collect those monies back?
I am not in a position to. I await for the direction from the, if it's the Attorney General's office or from OPA. I will wait for direction from them should that be deemed something I need to do, or it's something that they will need to collect and give me, let's say, for example, a lawsuit and give me that order to collect it from their payroll or whatnot. But yes, you are correct. The additional, the gap of $8 million is inclusive of all employees, including directors and cabinet members that did receive U2 overtime.
Thank you, Rep. Avalta. I now give the floor to the Vice Chairman Blanco.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Secretary. I just wanted to go back and seek clarification on the community disaster loan. The requirement that there shall be 3 years of deficits in order for it to be qualified as a grant. Now, we have not received the $88 million, and that is correct. We look forward to receiving it. We're confident about it. Now, the clock, you mentioned it starts ticking in 2018 all the way to 2020, or?
Yes, the clock ticked right after the disaster.
So you're saying if we receive it in 2021, the actual
right,
cash,
because
the clock
all
already,
the analysis and all the approvals of that was related to figures of and documentation and financial analysis taken into effect prior. They looked at 5 years prior to the disaster, the current state to current after the disaster, and a forecast of 3 years after we received the first 5 million. So they did a complete analysis and forecast, this money to help assist with basically recovery and or your losses due to the disaster. And so the clock ticked right after day one of the disaster.
so clarified. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Any other members? All right, if none, Mr. Secretary, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next question was requested to ask for a list of the furloughed employees that are set to be on a list of reduction in force. And I apparently do, as you mentioned earlier in the opening, I do not have the list of the employees. I received a copy of a listing of the 180 employees, but without names, just salaries, so I can do my analysis of what the cost would be should there be a severance pay, and what the cost would be for the total annual leave lump sum per employee that's on that list. And so I can ask any questions, answer any questions related to this item, if anyone has any questions.
Any members? I recognize Rep. Sablan.
Thank you. So these 180 employees that are on the termination list, is my understanding is that the estimated amount that's needed to return them back to government service is about 5.67 million. Okay. Is it the administration's plan to include that amount in the updated spending plan for the 88 million that we're expecting?
It was not in the spending plan of the 88 million, however, that could be revised. It was in the plan should we receive the rescue money.
The 515
yes,
million.
for
Okay.
sure.
Okay.
But it was one, which one do we go with? We didn't have enough information yet. Obviously, with the rescue plan, it has to still pass the U.S. Congress and pass and signed by the president. We're still awaiting word on the meeting between OMB and the FEMA CDL team, and we don't know what the timelines are there. So, like I said, we can include it in that. We just don't know when we're going to get the funds. The decision to go through and continue with the RIF is just based on the timeline. When we furloughed these employees, we furloughed, obviously, way more than 180. We were able to bring back over 100 people back. However, the date was April 13. And so based on the rules and regs and dealing with RIF, or the furlough for that matter, we needed to give notice 60 days before that. Hence the quick reply and submission of letters to get that process started, not knowing if there's any additional funds coming.
Okay. But
On time.
sure. Okay. And so the termination date that you're looking at, that the administration is looking at for these employees is April.
April 13.
Okay. But it is possible then that those terminations could be canceled or rescinded, or they could
Yes.
just be brought back from government service. Could they be allowed to remain in furlough status while we await these additional influxes of funds?
The administration had asked that the Civil Service Commission look into that, because their current regs say they cannot, because their current reg says 1 year. So we are asking if they can extend it, so that it buys us that little time. Therefore, we don't need to terminate them.
Okay.
I want this committee to know that we're trying our best as much as possible not to go through that route. We do want to get these people back back to work. I mean, their employment is needed, and should all this rescue money come, we can get back into full operation. I shared earlier, we have a lot of projects happening. We have a lot of things happening in this government that we need people to help get this through quicker and hopefully more efficient.
Okay. And just for your awareness as well, I had a meeting this morning with both the Medicaid and OPM directors, and there was discussion about the possibility of, because Medicaid is expanding. They also have received additional funding, and they need to hire staff, including staff on temporary assignments for very specific projects. And so there was interest in looking at this RIF list of 180 employees to see who could be funded under Medicaid and transferred on a temporary basis. But they would be funded positions, covered 90/10 by Medicaid. And that just happened this morning. That conversation just happened this morning, but perhaps that's another possibility while we await these other funding sources to come in. Thank you, and I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Sablan. Any other members? All right, if none, Mr. Secretary, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next topic is in regards to LWA, and I know we kind of just touched briefly on it, but mainly why the decision not to fund the LWA, knowing that other jurisdictions have. I am aware of other jurisdiction making that jump. I just could not, and I would put that decision on myself. I recommended not to do it because we can't afford if we have to owe 25% of even 300. And so, like we know that our brothers and sisters south of us had used and are giving out $300 in LWA. They have requested, like we did, thank you, for a waiver. We know that our waiver has not been approved. It's still sitting in the federal government to approve. I could not see us and obligate us for 25% of $300 should a decision say no, there's no waiver on the full 400. And therefore, until I got more definite answers or any lineage towards funding to meet that match or waive the match, I couldn't put us in that situation to owe FEMA the remaining 25% even at the $300 level. And therefore, it's just a fiscal responsibility I had and made and decided. It's not a decision because we didn't want to. It's just I couldn't put our government in any deeper water should we don't get a waiver.
All right, recognize Rep. Sablan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I hear your concern about adding to the CNMI's obligations through as a result of paying out these funds before we've identified a local match. But these funds were intended to cover the gap that occurred after FPUC money ran out in last July, right? And that extra $300 to $400, it would have made and would still make such a difference in going back into the pockets of people who have lost employment, and it could still be paid out. And my understanding, based on my discussions with the congressional office, was that we could have used CARES Act money to meet I think it was like a $1 to $2 million local match. That's according to the GAR. If the federal government would have covered $300, FEMA would have covered $300, and the CNMI share of that would have been another $100. And so, we could have used CARES Act money. I'm hearing you now say that we could potentially use CDL money to provide that match. But I would also ask that we consider the sort of the ripple effects, the benefits of putting another $400 into the pockets of people who are in unemployment situations or who have lost work. They'll spend that money immediately. They will spend that in the local economy, and so if we're looking at finding a couple of million and we have these CDL monies, potentially other funding sources that could just cover that, I would really strongly urge you to reconsider withholding those funds, because we literally are the only jurisdiction in the whole country that has not paid out a penny of these funds to date.
Keep in mind, we do not have these monies in our bank. We have not drawn down this additional 300 or the figures that were given to me by the Secretary of Labor, over 3,000 recipients, times 100, times 4 weeks, times almost 4 months. That value is it was $7-8 million. The government doesn't have that extra $7-8 million yet. I'm trying to find 5.7 for the furlough employees. So I couldn't make that decision. I will reconsider and discuss. I am in communication as soon as I was praying that included in the 100% waiver for all COVID request was signed by President Biden, I immediately asked, how about the LWA? Did that get signed? The answer was no, not yet. And so just as recent as 2 days ago, or Friday, I asked the PA office again to reach out to FEMA and ask if that waiver could be done so that we can go ahead and provide those dollars. We can still draw these dollars and still can pay these eligible recipients this amount. I just couldn't see myself putting us in close to $7 million debt if we didn't get a waiver. And so I understand weighing the options, but the numbers were kind of high when revenues and collections on a daily basis I see daily is not at the numbers I like to be comfortable with.
Sure, and if you could also just double check those numbers too, because the GAR had given a significantly lower amount that was required for the local match, from what I recall. And it wasn't 7 to 8. 7 to 8 was the total that the CNMI had available to pay out from FEMA, from the federal share. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Salon. Any other members? All right, if none, Mr. Secretary, I think in the interest of time, maybe just go through the rest and then we'll just bring our questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next on the list is the status of the fiscal response action plan. At the moment, there is no, I know part of the main action that the governor had done in response to the action plan was to establish the Economic Advisors Council, and they've been doing a lot of work in terms of looking at different processes and projects that can help boost economic activity. But in terms of some of the response from the fiscal summit we had, I don't have any personal knowledge of any actions being done or has been done to my knowledge. I'm sure there's people working on different aspects of it, but I can find out more information on it. In terms of, I think it is a good time. We know that the Economic Advisors Council did a presentation at the Senate this morning, and I believe they'll be meeting with this body as well. But once that is done, it'll be good timing to review, look at the different fiscal response items. I know there's a lot of items on there that I personally am pushing to assist with revenue generating bills or ideas that can help our Commonwealth and our coffers. And so I can get back to this and update this committee on a regular basis as I get more information regards to the fiscal response action plan. In terms of the reprogramming activities, I don't have that information with me. I apologize. I will. I did get this list just late last week, so I tried my best to get as much information. But I will also make a note to provide this committee with all reprogramming activities. As far as the status of GLHI payments, this is both health and life. We are currently budgeted $7.5 million total for both active and retirees. I'll let you know that to date, I still have a deficit in expenditures in the GLHI program. We currently owe $11.5 million to Aetna. I'm working with them on a payment plan. I'm doing my best to ensure that all our government employees and retirees continue their health coverages, as well as we are pretty much up to date with IAC, our life insurance. And so I will be sharing with this committee, especially as we get into budget deliberations and the budget meetings, what is the total real needs we need for GLHI, and I need to ensure or request to get it fully funded. There's been a lot of, this is the last year. We just ended the last open enrollment for retirees. It was a window, 3-year window for retirees to, to join our health plan. And so we have now the final numbers, and then now I can pretty much project what the true cost for our Aetna cost would be. And also, I'm in discussions and review of looking at different formularies, working with Aetna and their local representative, Pacifica, in ways to try to make this affordable for the government and minimizing any health insurance benefits to our members. And so in terms of GLHI, the insurance side, we're up to date. We're paid as of 1/30/2021. And so we still owe for the first pay. Usually the cycle, I'm considered up to date in the payment for AIC. So that's for GLHI. In terms of any austerity measures in effect, and what I think the question, or as I'm reading it, and maybe if any of you have direct questions regarding it, Public Law 2135 has a mandated austerity. We're all in austerity in terms of 64 hours. A lot of departments were able to offset and use federal funds to offset the additional 16 hours for their departments. So some departments have different divisions that are funded by the federal grants or programs, and some are unfortunately or unable to, and so there are some departments that are still working under 64 hours based on the local appropriations they have. I asked for a list from my staff, but I got a number of, I need to review the list because they came up with over 100 different business units, and I'm like, wait, I don't think that's not what they're asking. They're asking what actual departments or agencies are either fully getting paid 80 hours, or there are still some that are at 64. And so I can get back to this body a more definite answer on that. And then lastly, more about austerity measures. Does the administration anticipate any additional austerity measures? At the moment, no. And with anticipated federal funds coming into the fold, we plan to lift the austerity and ask this body to revise the budget so that we can have every government employee go back to 80 hours. And in addition, lift some of the, in terms of payroll, lift those austerity measures, including bringing back the remaining 180 civil service employees we have on the list. In addition, I do still want to keep fiscal spending constraints or measures in place. It's helping me minimize unnecessary expenditures on some other items, non-payroll related. And so therefore, we will continue with some of those, or I will make recommendations to the administration to keep some of those fiscal austerity constraints or things in place to minimize our expenditures. But our main goal is to ensure that we bring back these employees back to the government and lift austerity in terms of operating at an 80 hours per pay period operations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Secretary. Members, the Secretary has gone through the list of questions and requests for information. Now, before I open the floor to questions, we'll just limit this to 2 rounds if need be, and then any additional questions we can send to the Secretary, and he can prepare those responses as he submits these reports that were requested, which he does not have with him now. And so, with that, I will start off with the Vice Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll just make it real quick, Secretary. First, I thought I heard some positive news about revising the FY21 budget to bring it to 80 hours. Is that correct?
That is what we're discussing because in order to live and allow people to work 80 hours, I need to, um, we need to let this body know so we can revise that as well as um, bring back these people due to the budget of these people are at zero in the budget, and we need to show funding levels for that.
Okay, that's a very positive discussion, and I encourage that it be continued. Uh, Mr. Secretary, in closing, what is your outlook of our, I guess, revenue collections this whole fiscal year 21?
Um, I honestly feel we will meet the 133 with the local economy we have. Should we not get the rescue plan funds that we all are all praying and dreaming about, which will be a savior to our islands and our community. Um, my forecast is pretty much, although my first quarter was 3% below my projection, I do see us collecting in January and in the third quarter, the beginning of the third quarter. Keep in mind, we have a lot of activity. In terms of a lot of people getting PUA, which will have to report their income while they, and so many people may have some payments for local taxes, but many will not. Many will get 100% refund. We have a lot of well, just the $600 stimulus that we gave out several weeks back. I'm hoping to see a spike in, as we did in our first stimulus, see a spike in our BGRs for that. It's interesting that the PUA monies, there's a lot of money coming in for PUA, but to be frank with you, I don't really see that panning out in our local taxes and collection. Maybe because a lot are going towards whether it's their mortgage or their car payments, that I get the BGR on the initial sale and not on the payments that they pay to the banks or to financial institutions. And then obviously we don't see the wage and salary numbers because a lot have been furloughed or a lot have been out of work. And so just looking at our local economy without any tourists or any industry coming in, I see us meeting probably, I see us meeting the 133 budget. But then if things pan out, I do see us actually and could request for either additional monies to be appropriated because these federal dollars come in, projects are getting, ready to go, and a lot of the activities like the CDBG DR programs and people getting money for renovations and money for home construction. The challenge again is, and which we're working, is the labor pool to bring these people back. I mean, we got great news in the last several weeks. EDA approved both NMC's grant, that's over $20-some million, approved NMTI's almost $11 million EDA grant to build a new facility. So all this is money that's ready to go. It's just now, hopefully, it meets this current fiscal year so I can have some of that revenue to meet our 133. And so that is my outlook. Obviously, this is great that we have quarterly reports and quarterly meetings, and then we can have more real-time and more facts and data to support any forecast or adjustments, should they be needed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I yield, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Any other members? Rep Sablan, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. have kind of a mix of questions. The first is just to make you aware that the Health and Welfare Committee is interested in beginning a review of the medical referral program, which was an item on our fiscal action response list, right? And I wanted to request your assistance as well in providing the data that we need and also feedback about how we can provide for a smooth transition of the program to CHCC as had been recommended and establish some basic parameters for the program so that we are not constantly incurring year after year this deficit that we see. So that's the first item, to request your assistance with that. And then the second, I did take note of the Department of Finance promulgating proposed regulations for the government's travel policy. I know there isn't much travel happening right now, but having regulations in place and adopted for when travel does open up again, what is the timeline for formally and finally publishing or adopting them as regulations?
Oh, they were announced for a 30-day period, and they were no comments, and they were also announced again to promulgate. So it is in full effect as
Oh, it's in effect right
November
now.
as of November 1st.
Okay.
And so we have no, I'm sorry, December
Mm-hmm.
December 1st.
Okay.
And so it was published in October and November,
Mm-hmm.
and then now it is in full effect.
Okay.
So the new regulations, I can certainly email it to this body if you don't want to look it up in the register.
Yeah, I think
But-
it's on it was published as a proposed in the Law Revision Commission's website, but I didn't see that it was formally adopted.
Oh, it
yet.
should have been, yeah. So
okay.
we had
Okay.
two months of publication.
Okay.
And so we are now, yes, we adopted it, we've implemented it. So although there are some travels to Rhoda and Tinian and vice versa, they are now utilizing the new per diem rates.
Okay.
And as well as some changes in terms of some allowances that weren't allowed in the past. And so, yeah.
Okay, great. That's great to know. Thank you for that. And then finally, the Casino Commission is expecting to run out of money, from what I'm hearing and from what has been reported in March. And as you know, the casino industry is in a state of great uncertainty, but the Casino Commission is still playing a very active role in regulating and providing some oversight, and there are hearings that are happening even this week and next week. And I understand that $2 million was taken by the administration to support the government's COVID-19 response. Is there a plan to return those funds, and when?
Yes, thank you for that question. And in fact, it's not just CCC, but all the other areas I took the funds from. We've had meetings and discussed the possibility of reimbursing them back for it. I am very appreciative that they had funds available for us to be able to use to combat this COVID pandemic that we're experiencing. I did meet with CCC board and also their executive director. I did share with them that I will continue to, I can't pay them immediately up front back the $2 million. However, I'll work with them to cover their expenses for at least their payroll to ensure that there's no stoppage in their operation. And so direct communication between the executive director, Mr. Yoon, and also chairman. I assured them that we'll be assisting them.
Okay. And then they could be fully restored to those funds that were borrowed once these additional monies come in?
Yes.
Okay.
Included, part of the original spending planning was all the debts that the central government had with all the other component units as well.
Sure.
And keep in mind, my staff is working very hard and working with CUC, but we also have a high balance with CUC. And so we're trying to work on that. We're trying to find, we were able to disconnect a lot of different accounts that, so in that sense, a lot of these monies also can go to help what I owe all these different component units and pay our bills.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Sablan. Any other members? All right, if there are none, Secretary Atalig, the committee appreciates your presence here and for your quick response to many of the questions that we've requested from you. And this meeting is meant for the members to get to meet with you first off and to understand where we're at and what it's going to look like in the coming months. With that said, I understand that next month is going to be busy with you and the executive branch in terms of preparing the budget to be submitted to us. And so we'll hold off on any meetings, but should there be pressing issues, we'll just send them to you as a correspondence and wait for your response then. And I understand there are reports that you did not bring to us, but you will have them sent to us as soon as you can. And so with that, thank you, members. That takes care of our new business. Moving on to miscellaneous. Anyone have anything they want to bring up? I recognize Rep. Camacho.
Yeah, how are you, Mr. Secretary? I just wanted to ask a quick question about the stimulus program that's going on right now, the distribution otherwise. How's that program coming and what's the disqualifying factors to not avail to that?
You're speaking in regards to the recent $600 per person. We've distributed, we received $41 million for it. I believe we're up in about $36 million, maybe I'll be conservative and say 34 million. We've distributed out over over $30 million in stimulus. The requirements for the stimulus program is using the 2019 tax return, your tax return submission. And to qualify, you just have to have income if you're a single filer, 75,000 or less of AGI, adjusted gross income amount. If you're a joint filing, it's up to 150. If you make more than that, then they start subtracting $100 for every $1,000 you make. So that if you're a single filer, if you reach $100,000, you make $100,000 or more, you basically don't get any stimulus. And even if you have 10 kids, all your kids, you won't get any credit. Now, if you're a couple, same thing, at 150,000 or less as a joint, if combined salaries and income is over 150, they subtract $100 for every $1,000, up to $200,000. There's another bracket for head of households at $112,500. The main point is that everyone that is qualified to get it and that is in our system, we paid out. If you have constituents that are still waiting for any stimulus, they need to contact the Rev and Tax Office, or you can work with me and we'll find out what is holding it back. Because we're not holding any qualified tax payers stimulus at all. We do have monies available to pay it out immediately. And we have monies, should we run out of the $41 million, we can request for more. And that's the 600. Imagine when the rescue plan adds another 1,400. That's going to be amazing for our community. And when I see these monies go out in the stimulus, I see them spending money. The PUA, it's a different story. They're taking care of real bills, and which is great. But generally speaking, stimulus does help stimulate our economy. We saw that in the first stimulus, and that was at $1,200 a person, and there's no limit to how many dependents you have. It'll be 600, or this now 1,400 per dependent, including in this next one is including adult children dependents. So if you have a dependent that's 25 years or younger, they will also get the $1,400 stimulus. Hope that, in a nutshell, answered your question, Congressman.
Thank you, Secretary. Ayo.
Thank you, Rep. Camacho. Just one more before you leave, and this just came up from a constituent. Apparently, there are a couple of PUA claimants who are told that their papers are with finance pending payment. Is that, I mean, can you clear the air in terms of finance, and
Yes, let me
how
clear
quickly do
this.
you process these payments?
I appreciate the question. Although I wish a lot of people do ask me in our office for PUA information and do I have a check. I can tell you if you have a check or you have a check in progress. What we do is once or even twice a week, we do direct deposits quickly. We get the data on a Tuesday, and we try to scrub or look and review if there's anyone that has maybe inconsistent bank account information, so that we don't get an error in our direct deposit transfer. And we try to get this out by Thursday, if not at the latest, first thing Friday morning for direct deposits. Now, paper check. Those that do not get a direct deposit, we print checks usually on a Friday, Thursday, Friday. When we print the checks, we give the checks back to labor. And then labor reviews it and they distribute it. So I know for sure direct deposits comes directly. If it's a paper check, we print the checks, we distribute it, we give it to labor, and they distribute it. That's the process the Department of Labor requested to have. Personally speaking, I wish I could just send it all out and just put it all in the mail. I hope and wish more and more people take advantage of direct deposits, because that ensures for sure the money's straight into your account, and we minimize the long lines at the banks, and we're still in the pandemic. But anyway, that's to clear the air. We don't hold any PUA checks. The only PUA checks probably that we do have are the ones that return back to us by either wrong address, or someone was overpaid and they came back and repaid, and so we void the checks. But all this is all recorded on our end, and it should be recorded on the labor side end.
All right, thank you. Thank you for clearing the air. That way, their constituents won't blame
Yeah.
the Department of
Finance.
Finance for their delayed in payments. All right, so again, thank you, Secretary. Members, thank you for being here today. I will keep you posted on any future meetings, but for now, please prepare yourselves for the budget that is expected to receive on April 1st.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. With that said, next item on the agenda is adjournment. Can I get a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
The motion on adjournment has been placed and seconded. Discussion? All those in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay. Motion carries. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.